All right, everyone, hail and welcome to today's episode of Midgard Musings. Thanks for tuning in and watching today. My name is Jesse, and I am the host here on this channel. This is your first time coming by. I do weekly videos, usually covering topics of Norse heathenry, whatever may strike my interest or fancy at the time, as well as some other playlist or series type sort of format. If you go to the playlist section of the channel, you'll see a number of playlists that are there that have a bunch of different things that you can check out in a series type format. So definitely stop by and check all that stuff out. If you like this type of stuff and you want to see more of it, please subscribe to the channel, ding the bell for notifications, and you'll be notified whenever I upload new content, as well as be notified when other like channels or related content comes across, because that helps the YouTube algorithm figure out what it is you like and what you want to see. So your support there is appreciated. Also down in the description you'll see a number of ways that you can support the channel through monetary donations, become a patron supporter, buy some merchandise through the various stores that are available through Teespring and Redbubble. All that's down in the description, so check all that out. It does help support the channel in those ways. So today's discussion is about UPG. You may not have heard that term before. You may have heard it a lot, depending on the kind of platforms that you tend to peruse on the internet. Facebook, Twitter, whatever, even here on YouTube. So before we get started, let me go ahead and get the incense lit and the candle lit, and then that's kind of a tradition here on the channel. So once we get all that squared away, we'll get into talking about UPG. And oddly enough, you know, I don't always say it in all of my videos, but I do try to remind folks that this is my thoughts on things. What you hear and see from me from this channel does not reflect an overall all-encompassing heathen view of things. It is not necessarily the heathen worldview or view of things. It is a heathen's view or perspective or view of things. Okay, so this is my take on a lot of stuff. That is my UPG warning. I don't say it in every video, but I probably should, because I don't want people out here thinking that what I say is necessarily going to be something that you should take with you in your individual cultic practices. So there may be things about what you practice that are totally different from what we hear on this channel or what you hear from other folks, but leave that as it may. So what we're talking about when we reference UPG is unverified personal gnosis, right? It is the phenomenological concept that an individual's spirituality or insights may be valid for themselves without being generalized to the experience of others. It refers to the experience that an individual has with the divine, which kind of brings about an understanding that isn't backed up or can't be necessarily backed up by the established traditional lore and understandings that surround that particular view, okay? So that's why you'll hear me say, hey, UPG warning. That's why you'll hear maybe other channels or other folks say before they start talking about their specific views on things, hey guys, UPG warning here. This kind of is a disclaimer. It's to basically say, like, don't take what I say as fact or as based on traditional anything. It's just my views on stuff. And it is a term that you will see come up at some point in nearly every corner or platform from a heathen perspective. You know, we see it in Facebook groups, at least I do, because I'm in a number of heathen groups where I just kind of, you know, sit back and watch, don't necessarily comment or participate in them a lot. But it's, you know, stuff that can be easily it's an especially divisive topic, all right? Whenever it comes up, whenever there's stuff that comes up that doesn't have backing or you know, a foothold in traditional lore, you're going to hear a lot of backlash. The purpose of this video today, though, is to sort of bring about what my own UPG is on UPG, if that makes sense, where I see it being valuable within heathenry today. All right. So a lot of folks that may be watching this at some point may want to turn it off because they're their views on UPG is what it is, and that's fine. Go right ahead. I don't fault anybody for that. So that's kind of why I'm doing this video today, is to sort of bring up the good points, or the validity of where I see UPG fitting in heathenry today. All right. Even while the term has its sort of origins in modern heathenry, it's spread to other reconstructive religions, and even into non-reconstructive yet still pagan paths, kind of like what you might see in like Wiccan platforms. Okay, but it is especially important in heathenry, and that's why you'll see a lot of folks sort of harp on the fact that, look, you've got to say that this, what you're about to say, if it's not in the lore and if it's not based on tradition and this and that, you got to make sure that you're giving that disclaimer that it is in fact UPG. You'll see that a lot, or that approach happen a lot within the Reconstructionist sorts of heathens, which I myself am not. I don't consider myself to be one of those hardcore Reconstructionist types, although I do enjoy learning a lot about the history and the ancient traditions that our arch-heathen ancestors adopted and found to be true to themselves. I don't stay true to the historical aspects of it. I don't consider myself hardcore recon. I also don't consider myself just kind of one of these, all willy-nilly about this faith or this path. I like to know where my roots are and grow from those roots. So if you want to call it kind of middle of the road, where I'm not really hardcore recon and I'm not really all just floating around in left field somewhere about it, whatever that term is, that's kind of where I fit. That's where I find myself fitting within the heathen demographic, if you will. Without the attempt to adhere to tradition, and we're going to talk a little bit about tradition now, why it's so important. Without the attempt or making an effort to understand and adapt the beliefs of early heathens, heathenry in general just kind of becomes another syncretic pagan branch. Like you're just doing whatever for the sake of whatever, and there's no you're just kind of letting any sort of belief or practice make its way into what heathenry is specifically, and it can water down or taint, I believe, the solid root system that heathenry is built upon. We are very, and again, when I say we, I'm not trying to lump all heathens in one entire thing here, but the roots and the tradition that is what it's rooted in is a very important part. Why we do ritual the way we do it, why we bloat the way we do it, why we follow certain calendar holidays, the holy tides, why we do these certain things. There's reasons for it, and it's rooted in the traditions from our arch-heathen ancestors. And to be heathen, to be that is to adhere to practices and beliefs and general world views that are ancient in their nature. They are arch-heathen approach to things. Okay. So this is where the importance of labeling UPG kind of comes in, because if we're supposed to be adhering to these things, or if we're going to be following those arch-heathen approaches to stuff, we have to be able to distinguish what was known truth to our arch-heathen ancestors and what was known, or what is basically just modern creation, modern ideas. The problem is that not every person that comes into heathenry wants to necessarily take the time or have the inclination to self-educate. This becomes problematic because when somebody has UPG views that are being discussed as if it's, a general application to all heathenry, like I mentioned earlier, if you don't bring up that disclaimer, you're kind of putting yourself out there as an authority figure of knowledge, and I don't consider myself an authority figure, but the fact is I'm on a public platform and people will see these videos and think, well, this guy knows what he's talking about because of whatever, right? So we have to be able to distinguish the differences between these personal views, our personal experiences and what is known and documented as being what the archeheathens knew as truth and as part of their worldview, to be able to discern between the two and make it known that this is separate one and the other. I believe, that without UPG, heathenry itself won't survive, because we got to look at it, at least this is the way I look at it. Here's where I said in the beginning of the video, it's the UPG, my UPG on UPG, okay? So it's, when I say that if we don't allow UPG in heathenry that it won't survive, what I mean by that is that at some point in time, there's a very reasonable assumption to be concluded that the gods and all of the mysticism, the mystical aspects of this path were at some point someone's UPG, their experiences with the divine, how they kind of related to the elements and things, when things happened around them, what they called them, what they labeled them as, what it became, how it became tradition, and how it became that. Probably originally started as somebody's view, and somebody else said, yeah, you know what, that makes sense. I like that. I think it really fits me. So we can't be stuck so far in the past of history that we don't allow ourselves room for growth today. I don't think that there would be a next generation of heathens without the introduction, the safe and proper introduction of UPG within this path. Trying to recreate an Iron Age religion or faith or belief system, out of any of the Germanic peoples, Scandinavia, the Old Norse societies, anything like that, trying to recreate that is doomed to be just basically a museum piece, looking at all the cool historical parts, something to kind of glean from it. It's doomed to just stay that, without some of the UPG stuff being inserted to, in a sense, reinvigorate the life force that faith way was and has become. And you see it now and today. The Ostertrue Foundation, that's, I can't pronounce it correctly, but the big one that's in Iceland, they've been doing stuff now and recreating an ancient path, but involving and incorporating modern things for like the last 40 plus years. So there's that level of modern insertions of things that keep the old ways alive and allow it to advance and to grow today. It's not necessarily, UPG itself is not necessarily a bad thing, as long as I feel that it's known to be as such. It's kind of what we use to fill in the gaps, and take up the space in between the historical parts, the documented things that we know for a fact were a part of this archeheathen worldview. It fills in the gaps between that, all that stuff that we know. For instance, like there's things nowadays. I'm just going to use like one or two examples. One of the first things that come to mind as a modern heathen, doesn't really have anything to do in ancient heathenry. And when I say ancient, I'm talking pre-Christian Scandinavia, and that is the signing of the hammer. Okay, you'll see it done a lot in heathen rituals, where to hallow a space, to sort of make it sacred and separate it off from the profane, is to sign the hammer. Sometimes you will see it done with just the same sign of a hand, where you'll sort of, create a symbol of what looks like a hammer, or sometimes you will see it being done holding a ritual hammer, where they will lower the from the top to the bottom, left to the right. Sounds like a dance move. But the sign of the hammer, that is a modern thing, and it's modern in the context of heathenry as a whole. We read about it in one of the sagas, I think, if it's Ynglinga saga, I can't remember exactly which one it is. For everybody that's watching that remembers it, feel free to drop down in the comments and comment down below where it was done, where the sign of the hammer was first done. But I know it was during a Christianized period, or at least it was documented during that time. So again, the influences of that being done may have had, or the reasons it was done may have had influence in the Christianized sign of the cross, since it's so similar looking, and it was done to sort of try and make it more appealing to the pagan to convert. There's that whole argument, right? Another thing is, so there's a modern one. There's, that was probably, that was UPG, but has become a part of tradition. Another one is how runes are read and worked in divination. I've talked about this before. There's a whole series on rune study that at the end of the series I go into how I read and divinate with the runes. But again, how the runes are done for magical use, there's very little, if any, evidence written down that supports how it was done. We know that they were used for divination, but in terms of how it was done, whether they were laid out in a pattern, or whether they were cast out, or whether they were painted on things, or whatever, based on the individual circumstance of why they were being used, all that kind of stuff is, again, today it's UPG stuff. It's what one person decided would become a practice, and it has now become somewhat of a tradition. And everybody's tradition is different. It's all stuff that's become a part of modern day heathenry rituals and beliefs. How it's done is dependent on not just the individual, but also on the tribe or kindred that uses these particular things. So while these practices are acceptable in that they fill a role or a need for a collective, whether it be a tribe or kindred or a thade or whatever your collective of heathens is called, while it's become acceptable for that need to be for folks to engage in them, we can't make the mistake of ignoring that they are modern in origin. Right? There's no historical backing that goes to ancient heathen times that says, yeah, this is how the pre-Christianized lands did things, because we don't know, right? We just don't know. And one other thing that I definitely want to bring up when it comes to the fact that why I feel UPG definitely has a place in heathenry, as long as we label it as such, is that the true nature of our gods and goddesses and stuff like that, it's a mystery. It's always going to be a mystery, and the intellectual knowledge about the gods, the things that we have written down in the lore, the way they were portrayed in the sagas and throughout, like the Poetic Edda, the Prose Edda, all these things, the intellectual knowledge that we have about the gods is no substitute, all right? And this is very important for me to say. Knowing about what's written down is no substitute for first-hand experiences. We cannot discount personal experiences of people that have felt the presence of the gods over the fact that, well, if it's not written down and if it hasn't been documented, then you're just full of baloney. You know what I mean? Like you're hallucinating, you're doing this, whatever. That's my view on it. I would rather hear about someone's personal dealings and be able to gather my own insight from that than to go strictly based off of what's written down in the lore. You cannot substitute real life first-hand experiences with intellectual knowledge. Don't discredit the intellectual parts of things, by no means. What I said earlier is that there's some folks that come into this that are a bit reluctant or not as enthused to educate yourselves. Sorry, you gotta do it. You have to educate yourself. If you want to build upon your relationships with the gods and develop a thing that is heathenry, you gotta know where it comes from. You gotta know where the roots are. You have to become educated, at least to an extent. How far you go, how much you become educated on it is entirely up to you, but you have to start somewhere. You have to know what you're doing and talking about when it comes to certain things. You got to read the Eddas, the sagas. I think there's like 700 some odd different sagas. I haven't read them all, but you got to read the saga of the Inglings, Inglinga saga. That's a big one. The Poetic Edda, specifically the Prose Edda, the Snorri Sturluson's authoring the poems that he kind of took from the Poetic Edda as well as other poems and put it into his own thing. But again, it's all part of it. And then doing your own research on the indigenous peoples of those lands to see how they lived, how they functioned, what we know about them in today. That's important. That intellectual knowledge is important. But it doesn't, I believe, go above what those individual feelings are. I know that I've had experiences with the gods that have never been documented by myself. And I'm sure that those experiences that other people have had aren't necessarily documented down either, but they were there. We felt them. They are real to us, and we know that because we feel it. So that's my take on UPG, everybody. I think that it does have an important role in heathenry today to allow heathenry to grow. We just need to understand and realize that we can't go so far away from the roots of things, from the rooted traditions of things, that we're like just, again, recreating or something that's totally different than the way it was supposed to be. Use the core system to build on things, and then allow that personal those personal experiences to help build and grow our communities today. It's the only way that I really truly see heathenry surviving in the long term. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Please let me know down in the comments section how you think UPG fits in heathenry. Whether you think it should be something that is discounted and not even thought of, or whether you think that it should definitely be a part of our not only individual cultic practices, but that should have its way in somehow, form, or fashion be a part of the tribal or kindred growth on things. So thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Please subscribe if you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more, ding the bell for notifications. Everybody that's watching live on Facebook, please stick around so that way I can read your comments. I appreciate all of your support watching on today's video. Hail, and I'll see you in the next video.